The Arab armies were at the gates. Constantinople was under siege, and the future of the Byzantine Empire hung by a thread. This wasn't just a battle, it was a desperate gamble by Emperor Constantine IV, a high stakes play that would determine whether the East Roman Empire survived or fell. Witness the incredible 5-year struggle that defined an era and forever changed the course of civilization. In 674, the threat is not abstract. It arrives as sails on the horizon and as a clock that resets every spring. The Umayyad Caliphate has already taken Syria and Egypt, provinces that once paid the army, fed the capital, and proved God still favored Rome. Constantinople is the lock on the straits. If it opens, the Aegean and the Balkans become corridors, not borders. The city's wealth matters, but the deeper price is legitimacy. Whoever holds Constantinople can claim to be the inheritor of Rome. For the Umayyads, it is conquest with a promise attached, an empire that looks inevitable if the queen of cities falls. Inside the palace, Constantine IV is young enough to be underestimated and old enough to understand what he has inherited, an empire that can no longer trade territory for time. His father, Constans II, has been murdered far from the capital, in Syracuse, proof that even an emperor can be reached if his own men decide he is expendable. Constantine's first fear is not only the enemy at sea, but the enemy in the corridors, generals who might gamble on a new ruler if the siege goes badly, bureaucrats who might hoard grain, factions that might insist on a theological compromise with the invader if it buys peace. His decision is forced immediately. Rule from Constantinople, not from a traveling court, and make the capital a fortress that can survive being cut off. The constraint is structural. Shrinking revenues, exhausted themes, and a navy that must be rebuilt while the enemy is already launching. The Umayyad plan is not a single assault, but an apparatus. Each campaigning season, fleets appear, raid, probe, land troops, and then withdraw to winter bases, often at Cyzicus, across the water, close enough to watch the city's harbors like a lid over a pot. It's a siege designed to wear down confidence more than stone. Constantinople's walls are formidable, but walls do not eat. Every summer becomes a referendum on whether the emperor can keep bread in the markets and soldiers on the battlements. Constantine's risk is humiliation. One season of hunger riots, and the city's defenders may decide the emperor is the problem, not the Arabs. So Constantine turns governance into logistics. In guarded storerooms and naval arsenals along the Golden Horn, officials count grain, pitch, timbers, and men as if counting time itself. He cannot match the caliphate man for man. He must outlast. The city's natural defenses, its peninsular position, its protected harbor, its access to water, become levers of strategy, but only if discipline holds. The forced decision is harsh. Rationing, requisitioning, and the prioritization of the fleet over distant frontiers. The constraint is political. Every ship hauled into the capital is a coastline left. Thinner, every tax squeezed is another local magnate tempted to resist. The Umayyads keep coming, and that repetition is its own weapon. The besiegers want Byzantines to believe that resistance is a temporary delay before destiny. Year after year, the same question presses. Is the empire merely waiting to be replaced? Constantine has to break not only a siege line, but a psychology of inevitability. And that is where the empire's most guarded advantage enters the story. Not as legend, but as a decision made in private. Somewhere in the chain of command, in a guarded room where only trusted officers are present, a naval weapon is introduced that cannot afford to fail publicly. Later generations will call it Greek fire. The sources do not fully agree on its composition or delivery, and that uncertainty is itself revealing the state treated it as a strategic secret, and later writers treated it as a miracle because they could not describe it. What matters is what it did to decision-making. It allowed the Navy to turn proximity into terror. It punished dense formations of ships. It made the sea feel unsafe in a way oars and rams never could. Constantine's gamble is acute: use it too early and risk capture. Use it too late and risk collapse. The constraint is secrecy under siege. People talk when they are frightened, and frightened people are everywhere. When the moment comes, it is not pageantry. It is a test of morale delivered in physical force. Byzantine ships sortie under pressure, in waters where a misjudgment of wind or distance means death. The liquid fire clings, it refuses the logic sailors rely on, that water ends flame. In an instant, confidence can turn to panic, and panic spreads faster on a crowded deck than any signal flag. The immediate consequence is tactical. Umayyad ships burn, formations break, land forces lose the close support they expected. The deeper consequence is theological and political. The besiegers' sense of divine favor takes a wound in full view of their own men. But Greek fire does not end the siege by itself. It buys space for winter to hurt the attackers more than the defenders, space for provisioning to matter, space for disease and storm to become Byzantine allies. The longer the Umayyads maintain their seasonal pressure, the more their own system strains. They must feed men far from home, maintain fleets through hostile waters, and justify repeated failure to commanders whose careers depend on success. The caliphate's strength, its expansionary momentum, becomes a constraint. Retreat looks like weakness, and weakness invites internal challenge. So they push, and the pushing bleeds them. By 678, the equation shifts. A major Arab withdrawal becomes possible, not because courage suddenly fails, but because the cost-benefit balance breaks. Sources emphasize storms and losses, and those can be true without being the whole truth. Weather is a structural force that punishes long supply lines and rewards the side with secure harbors. Constantine's decision at this point is to press the advantage without overreaching. He cannot chase the enemy into ruinous expeditions. His job is to make sure they leave and think twice about returning. The consequence is a negotiated pause, often described as a treaty with tribute, that looks ambiguous in triumphalist memory. But for Constantinople, survival is victory. The empire remains an empire. Survival, however, does not grant unity. It exposes fractures that war temporarily covered. Constantine has won time, and time forces him to answer a question: Emperor's dread. What exactly is the empire now? A state that has lost so much territory has to tighten control somewhere else. And tightening control means choosing sides. That choice detonates inside the church. For decades, the imperial government had tried to manage religious division with formulas that could be enforced by law. Monothelitism, the teaching that Christ had one will, was not merely a theological hobby. It was an attempted instrument of reconciliation, meant to keep newly conquered or recently contested provinces within an imperial religious umbrella. After the loss of Syria and Egypt, that policy becomes a trap. It has failed to hold territory, but it still poisons relations with Rome and divides bishops inside the remaining empire. Constantine is threatened by irrelevance. If emperors cannot defend the capital and cannot define orthodoxy, what are they for? His forced decision is dangerous. Call a council and stake imperial authority on a clean verdict. In 680, the council is convened in Constantinople, and the physical setting matters because coercion is never far away. This is not a neutral monastery in the countryside. It is the imperial city where guards control doors and imperial officials control agendas. Papal legates arrive carrying letters that will be read aloud. Bishops arrive knowing their careers depend on being seen as orthodox by the winning side. Constantine's risk is twofold. If the council fails, it proves the emperor cannot command the church. If it succeeds too aggressively, it could provoke backlash among elites invested in the old compromise. The constraint is legitimacy. An emperor can pressure, but he needs decisions that look canonical, not merely obedient. The debate is meticulous because precision is power. Texts are read, earlier councils cited, patristic authorities weighed like evidence in a courtroom. This is not academic theater. It is a contest over who gets to define reality. If Christ has two wills, then the full humanity and full divinity, already settled in earlier councils, are protected from imperial shortcuts. If Christ has one will, the state retains a doctrinal tool that can be used to smooth dissent. Constantine's preference aligns with political necessity. He needs reconciliation with Rome and clarity inside his borders more than he needs a failed policy's remnants. Yet he cannot simply dictate, he must be seen to preside over consensus. The council's outcome condemns monothelitism and, crucially, names names. Even Pope Honorius is posthumously anathematized in the council's acts, an explosive detail, because it signals that no office is immune if it is judged to have failed the faith. That condemnation cuts both ways. It strengthens doctrinal clarity, but it also reveals the ferocity of legitimacy anxiety. Institutions purge compromised authorities to prove they are clean. Constantine accepts this risk because the alternative is worse. A church split along lines that mirror political weakness. The consequence is the Sixth Ecumenical Council, a settlement that will echo for centuries in Eastern and Western theology. Yet the empire does not pause its external threats while bishops argue. In 680, even as the council meets, the Balkans erupt. The Bulgar leader Asparuk pushes south of the Danube, and Byzantine forces suffer a defeat that leads to recognition of a Bulgar polity on imperial soil. Constantine's options are constrained by arithmetic: fewer troops, multiple fronts, and a state still recovering from the siege years. The decision to accept a new power in the Balkans looks like retreat, but it is also triage. The consequence is permanent: a new neighbor state that will shape Byzantine strategy for generations, forcing emperors to treat the Balkans as a contested arena, not a restored province. Internal control becomes Constantine's next battlefield. He cannot afford rival emperors when survival depends on rapid obedience. His brothers, Heraclius and Tiberius, are co-emperors in name, living symbols that factions could rally around if they distrust Constantine's policies. In a guarded setting where consent is manufactured, Constantine removes them from imperial status, reportedly by mutilation, an act not of cruelty for its own sake, but a Byzantine calculus of legitimacy. An emperor must be physically whole to rule. Disfigurement becomes a political lock. The risk is moral outrage and family backlash. The structural constraint is the empire's repeated experience that civil war invites foreign disaster. The consequence is a darker stability, fewer claimants, more fear, and a clearer line of command. When Constantine IV dies in 685, he leaves no romantic restoration, no reconquered Syria, no triumphant march to Jerusalem. He leaves something more fragile and more decisive, an empire that has learned to survive by narrowing, by hardening, and by making its capital the immovable center of strategy. The first Arab siege fails, and that failure has consequences beyond Byzantium. It helps prevent the eastern Mediterranean from becoming an Umayyad lake. It buys time for new political identities to consolidate in Europe and for Christianity to remain institutionally centered in a city that can still claim Roman continuity. The council he called also reshapes the behavior of the system he ruled. After Constantine, emperors will continue to meddle in doctrine, but they will do so with heightened awareness that theological formulas cannot simply be engineered to solve political problems without long-term cost. Bishops will cite councils as constraints on emperors, and emperors will cite councils as weapons against rivals. Orthodoxy becomes not only belief, but infrastructure, records, precedents, an arsenal of words that can legitimize or destroy careers. Constantine IV the Younger is remembered for holding Constantinople and for presiding over a council. Those are not separate achievements. They are the same act in two arenas, proving that the imperial office can still protect bodies behind walls and still command meaning inside institutions. In the 7th century, power is not a possession, it is a performance under siege. Constantine survives by making the empire smaller, more disciplined, and more doctrinally coherent, then paying for that coherence with harsher control at home and permanent concessions on the frontier. The Byzantines who follow inherit his lesson. The empire will endure, but only by treating every season, war, famine, and theology alike, as a test of whether obedience can be extracted faster than. Welcome to the Epic History Tales channel. Subscribe to the channel if you want to watch the similar video